The office was silent, except for the slow click of high heels against the polished floor. Charlotte Holloway leaned against her desk, arms crossed, watching with amusement as Evelyn Carter wiped the spilled coffee off the table. Pathetic, Charlotte smirked. You should be grateful I let you work here at all. Evelyn said nothing. She simply picked up the rag, her fingers pressing into the fabric. Not yet. She kept her head down. But inside, she was counting the hours. Because by this time tomorrow, Charlotte would be the one begging, and Evelyn, she'd own everything. You won't believe what happens next. Keep watching. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. The air inside the office was thick with the scent of fresh coffee and expensive cologne. Polished floors gleamed under the bright ceiling lights as employees in sharp suits walked past without so much as a glance at the woman scrubbing the floor. Evelyn Carter kept her head down, pushing the mop steadily across the tiles. She was used to being invisible here. People walked past her as if she were part of the furniture, never bothering to acknowledge her presence. But that was fine. She had her own reasons for staying quiet. A sharp click of heels echoed down the hallway. Evelyn recognized the sound instantly. It was Charlotte Holloway, the CEO. She didn't need to look up to know that the woman was already wearing her usual smug expression. Charlotte never wasted an opportunity to remind Evelyn of her place. What a surprise, Charlotte's voice dripped with sarcasm. Still here? I swear these floors would be cleaner if I hired someone who actually knew what they were doing. Evelyn paused, gripping the mop handle a little tighter, but she didn't respond. She had learned long ago that nothing she said would make a difference. Charlotte didn't see her as a person, just someone to clean up after her. Michael Owens, the company's senior manager, walked past at that moment, adjusting his expensive watch. He glanced at Evelyn, his lip curling slightly in disgust. Honestly, Charlotte, why do we even have her around? I've seen better cleaning jobs in a gas station bathroom. Charlotte smirked. You're right. Maybe we should let her go. She's lucky I've been generous enough to keep her here this long. A few employees passing by chuckled under their breath. Others glanced at Evelyn, then quickly looked away. No one wanted to get involved. No one ever did. Evelyn calmly wiped the supposed stain, her face giving nothing away. She had been working here for years, long enough to know exactly how things worked. She had seen people like Charlotte before. Entitled, cruel, convinced that money made them better than everyone else. It was always the same. Charlotte rolled her eyes. Honestly, I don't even know why I keep you around. She took a sip of her coffee, then suddenly, without warning, tipped the cup forward, letting the dark liquid spill all over the freshly cleaned floor. Oh dear, Charlotte gasped mockingly, pressing a hand to her chest. What a mess. Better clean it up before someone important steps in it. Michael laughed, shaking his head. Lisa Turner, the company receptionist, bit her lip, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. No one ever did. The laughter in the hallway grew louder. Evelyn stood still for a moment, her fingers tightening around the mop. She had expected this. She had been waiting for this. She slowly knelt down, soaking up the coffee with a rag as the voices above her buzzed with amusement. But behind her steady movements, behind her calm expression, something was shifting. Charlotte thought she was humiliating her. Charlotte thought she was winning. But she had no idea what was coming next. Evelyn continued wiping the coffee, her movements slow and deliberate. She could feel Charlotte's eyes on her, could hear the muffled laughter of the employees who stood watching, treating the moment like entertainment. But inside, Evelyn wasn't humiliated. She wasn't defeated. She was patient. Charlotte leaned against the reception desk, arms crossed, watching Evelyn struggle to clean the mess she had created. You know, she mused, tilting her head, I've always wondered what it's like to settle for this kind of life. Mopping floors, scrubbing toilets, no ambition, no future, just existing. Michael let out a chuckle. You give her too much credit, Charlotte. I doubt she even thinks about the future. People like her don't get anywhere. Evelyn squeezed the rag in her hands, wringing the coffee into the mop bucket. The words didn't sting the way Charlotte and Michael thought they would. She had heard worse before, much worse. What they didn't know, what they would never even imagine, was that she had been planning for this day. Lisa Turner, the receptionist, stood a few feet away, pretending to type on her computer but listening to every word. She shifted uncomfortably, stealing a quick glance at Evelyn. Unlike Charlotte and Michael, she didn't find this funny. She had seen the way Evelyn worked, the way she carried herself. There was something different about her, something that didn't fit the way Charlotte treated her. Charlotte sighed dramatically. Well, I suppose it doesn't matter anymore. You won't be our problem much longer. Evelyn looked up, her expression calm. Oh, Charlotte smirked. That's right, you're done here. Effective immediately. A few gasps rippled through the office. Even Lisa's fingers froze over her keyboard. Evelyn blinked once, twice before setting the mop aside. You're firing me? Charlotte nodded, looking delighted with herself. Let's be honest, you should have been gone a long time ago. Consider this a favor. Now you can go, I don't know, mop floors somewhere else. Michael chuckled. She might get lucky. Maybe there's an opening at one of those fast food places. Evelyn slowly stood up, wiping her hands on the cloth she had been using. She locked eyes with Charlotte, and for the first time since she had walked into the building that morning, she allowed herself to smile. A small, knowing smile. Lisa saw it first, and her stomach twisted. Something about it felt off. Not like someone who had just lost their job. Not like someone who was worried about what came next. It was a smile that said something else entirely. Charlotte, however, didn't notice. She was too busy enjoying herself. Well, Charlotte folded her arms. Don't just stand there. Go on, get out. You're no longer welcome here. Evelyn took a slow breath, reached for the rag in her hand, and dropped it onto the mess of coffee still staining the floor. She tilted her head slightly and let out a quiet chuckle. All right, she said, her voice smooth and even. I'll go. She turned, walking toward the exit, as whispers followed behind her. But as she reached the door, she paused, looking over her shoulder one last time. I'll see you soon, Charlotte. And with that, she walked out. Charlotte laughed. What was that supposed to mean? Michael grinned. Sounds like she finally lost it. Lisa, however, watched the doors swing shut behind Evelyn, her heart pounding in her chest. Something wasn't right. Something was coming. And whatever it was, she had a feeling Charlotte wasn't going to like it. The office settled back into its usual rhythm, but a strange tension lingered in the air. Charlotte leaned against the reception desk, checking her reflection in her phone camera, completely unbothered by what had just happened. Firing Evelyn had felt like nothing more than an amusing way to start the day. She should have been grateful I kept her here as long as I did, Charlotte muttered, smoothing a strand of hair back into place. Michael chuckled, adjusting his tie. She should have begged. That's what people like her usually do. Lisa, however, wasn't laughing. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, pretending to work, but her mind was still on the way Evelyn had left. There was no anger, no pleading, just that strange, knowing smile. Something felt off. Before Lisa could say anything, the glass doors of the office swung open, and a few board members rushed in, their expressions tense. Among them was Richard Whitman, the company's senior financial officer, and Eleanor Hayes, the head of legal affairs. Lisa had worked here long enough to know that whenever Richard and Eleanor arrived unannounced, it was serious. Michael noticed them too and frowned. What's going on? Richard strode past the front desk without so much as a glance at Charlotte or Michael. He looked pale, his forehead glistening with sweat. Eleanor walked briskly beside him, flipping through a thick folder of documents. Lisa hesitated before calling out, Mr. Whitman, is everything okay? Richard didn't stop walking. Number. It's not. Charlotte raised an eyebrow, finally pushing herself away from the desk. What's with all the drama? Eleanor, who rarely spoke more than necessary, stopped just long enough to glance at Charlotte before shaking her head. You'll find out soon enough. The two disappeared into the executive wing, leaving a wave of murmurs in their wake. Employees whispered, throwing confused glances at one another. It wasn't normal for board members to show up in the middle of the day looking like the sky was about to fall. Michael scoffed. Probably some boring paperwork issue. He checked his watch. Whatever it is, it's got nothing to do with us. Charlotte smirked. Exactly, not our problem. But Lisa wasn't so sure. She stared at the closed office doors, that uneasy feeling growing in the pit of her stomach. Something was happening, and for the first time since she started working here, she had a feeling that Charlotte and Michael were about to find themselves in the middle of something much bigger than they could handle. Charlotte sauntered back to her office, unfazed by the tension in the air. Whatever had Richard and Eleanor worked up, it had nothing to do with her. At least that's what she told herself. She settled into her plush leather chair, crossing her legs as she scrolled through emails. Her inbox was filled with the usual investment reports, partnership requests, and company memos she barely skimmed. Nothing important. Nothing that could possibly explain the sudden chaos. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Michael stepped in, his expression mildly curious. "So, are we just going to pretend the board isn't running around like headless chickens? Or are we going to find out what's going on?" Charlotte smirked, leaning back. "If it's important, they'll tell us. Besides, I have better things to do than worry about some corporate nonsense." Michael chuckled, shaking his head. "You're really not concerned at all, are you?" Charlotte scoffed. "Please, whatever it is, it's probably just a minor stock issue, or maybe another department is underperforming. Either way, it doesn't affect me." Before Michael could respond, the intercom on Charlotte's desk crackled to life. Lisa's voice came through, hesitant but firm. "Ms. Holloway, Mr. Whitman has requested your presence in the boardroom. Immediately." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "Now?" "Yes, ma'am," Lisa confirmed. "The entire board is already inside." Michael shot Charlotte a glance. "Okay, maybe this is something." Charlotte rolled her eyes but stood up anyway. "Fine, let's go see what all the fuss is about." As the two walked toward the boardroom, the energy in the office felt different. Employees whispered in small clusters, their eyes darting towards Charlotte and Michael as they passed. The usual air of superiority Charlotte carried seemed to waver under the weight of so many stares. The boardroom doors were already open when they arrived. Inside, every high-ranking official of the company sat at the long, polished table. Richard stood at the head, his fingers drumming anxiously against a thick file of documents. Eleanor was beside him, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Charlotte smirked, stepping inside. "All right, what's so important that you needed me here?" Richard didn't return her smug look. Instead, he took a deep breath, his voice tight. "As of this morning," he said, flipping open the file, "Weston Enterprises has been sold." Silence. Charlotte blinked. Michael frowned. "Wait, what?" Eleanor pushed a contract across the table. "We were acquired. Every single share has been bought out. Effective immediately, there is a new owner of this company." Charlotte let out a sharp laugh, the sound bouncing off the walls. "That's impossible. I would have known if we were being bought out." Richard's lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, you didn't." Charlotte snatched the contract off the table, her eyes scanning the documents furiously. But as she read, her smirk slowly faded. Her fingers tightened around the paper. "No," she whispered. This has to be some kind of joke." Michael leaned over to glance at the contract himself. His face paled instantly, because printed clearly at the bottom of the document was the signature of the company's new owner. Evelyn Carter. Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. Her heart pounded in her chest, the letters on the page blurring together. Number. This wasn't possible. There was no way. And yet it was right there, in black and white. The janitor she had fired yesterday now owned everything. Charlotte's grip on the contract tightened as a cold wave of disbelief washed over her. Her throat felt dry, her mind racing to process what she had just read. Evelyn Carter. Evelyn Carter. The woman she had humiliated, mocked, and thrown out like garbage, now owned Weston Enterprises. This is a mistake," Charlotte stammered, her voice unsteady. "There's no way. This must be some kind of joke." Eleanor sighed, her expression calm but firm. "It's not a joke, Charlotte. The paperwork was finalized last night. The transaction is legal, and all shares have been transferred. As of this morning, Evelyn Carter is the sole owner of this company." Michael's mouth opened, then closed. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the document, scanning the details himself. "No, no, no. This can't be real. That woman was a janitor. Where would she even get the kind of money to pull this off?" Richard's jaw tightened. You should have done your research, Michael. Evelyn Carter is not who you thought she was. Charlotte felt her head spin. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She had spent years climbing to the top, stepping over anyone in her way, making sure people like Evelyn stayed beneath her. And now somehow, Evelyn had won. No, Charlotte muttered, shaking her head. There's no way. This has to be fraud. A setup. Someone needs to call legal. That's enough, Richard interrupted sharply. His voice, usually controlled, was edged with irritation. The deal is done, Charlotte. You don't have any say in it. A tense silence filled the room. Charlotte glanced around the table, hoping, praying, that someone would agree with her, that someone would say this was a mistake. But no one did. Every board member looked either resigned or indifferent. Some looked downright relieved. And then, as if things couldn't get worse, the boardroom doors swung open. Evelyn Carter walked in. She wasn't wearing her janitor uniform anymore. She wasn't carrying a mop, wasn't pushing a cleaning cart. Instead, she stepped into the room in a tailored black suit, heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Her posture was straight, her expression unreadable, but there was something behind her eyes, something dangerous. Charlotte felt her stomach twist. Evelyn moved slowly, deliberately, her gaze sweeping across the room before settling on Charlotte. A small, almost amused smile played at her lips. "Well," Evelyn said, her voice smooth and controlled, "I hope I didn't keep you all waiting." Charlotte felt her entire world tilt. No, no, no. This wasn't over. It couldn't be over. The air in the boardroom was suffocating. No one moved. No one spoke. All eyes were locked on Evelyn as she walked further into the room, every step echoing in the heavy silence. Charlotte could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, but she refused to look away. Evelyn pulled out a chair at the head of the table, the chair that used to belong to Charlotte, and sat down as if she had always belonged there. She leaned back slightly, crossing her legs, her hands resting calmly on the polished wood. Michael was the first to snap out of his daze. He shot up from his seat, his face red with disbelief. "This is ridiculous. You don't belong here." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the panic beneath his anger. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, her expression cool. "That's funny," she said lightly. "I remember you saying something similar yesterday. Something about people like me not getting anywhere?" Michael's mouth opened, then shut. His face twisted in frustration, but he didn't have a response. Charlotte finally found her voice. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but you're not qualified to run this company," she spat. "This business is built on decades of experience, on leadership, on power?" Evelyn interrupted, tilting her head. Charlotte clenched her jaw. Evelyn let out a soft chuckle. "That's what this was always about for you, wasn't it? Power, control, keeping people like me at the bottom while you sit up here, pretending you earned everything." She exhaled, shaking her head slightly. "But you never stopped to ask yourself what would happen if the people you stepped on had power of their own." Eleanor cleared her throat, shifting uncomfortably. "We should probably go over the transition detail," she suggested, her voice hesitant. Evelyn nodded. "Yes, let's." She glanced around the table, her gaze sharp. "For those of you who actually care about this company, nothing major will change. Yet. But there will be new policies put in place immediately." Charlotte's nails dug into her palms. "You can't just waltz in here and start making changes. You don't know anything about running a company this size." Evelyn leaned forward slightly, resting her chin on her hand. "And yet, I own it." Charlotte felt her stomach churn. Evelyn tapped her nails lightly against the table. "You're right about one thing, though," she admitted. "I don't have decades of experience in corporate boardrooms." Charlotte straightened, trying to hold on to some sense of control. "Then step down before you embarrass yourself," she sneered. Evelyn's smirk widened. "Oh, I didn't say I was inexperienced. I said I didn't waste my years sitting in boardrooms, shuffling papers and barking orders." She folded her hands together. "Unlike you, Charlotte, I built something of my own. While you were too busy looking down on me, I was investing in real estate, growing businesses, and building an empire that now has enough power to own yours." Michael looked like he had swallowed a lemon. Charlotte gritted her teeth. Lisa, who had been standing near the door, had to physically stop herself from smiling. She had always suspected Evelyn was different, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. Evelyn let the weight of her words settle before she spoke again. "But let's get back to business," she said smoothly, "because there's one thing that needs to be handled before anything else." She turned her gaze directly to Charlotte. "You." Charlotte stiffened. Evelyn rested her elbow on the arm of the chair, her fingers tapping lightly against her chin. "Tell me, Charlotte," she mused, "if you had known who I really was yesterday, would you have treated me differently?" Charlotte's throat tightened. Evelyn gave her a long, knowing look. "You don't have to answer that," she said after a pause, "because we both know the truth." Charlotte could feel her world slipping. She could feel the weight of real power in the room, and it wasn't hers anymore. And for the first time in her life, she was afraid. The silence in the boardroom stretched longer than it should have. Charlotte could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, suffocating her. Her fingers curled against the table, her nails digging into the polished wood. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. There had to be some way to turn this around. But Evelyn wasn't giving her any room to breathe. She sat there calm and collected, watching her with the same patience Charlotte had never bothered to have for anyone beneath her. "I have to admit," Evelyn continued, tapping her nails lightly against the table, "when I walked out of here yesterday, I almost thanked you." Charlotte flinched. "Thank me?" Evelyn's lips curled into a slow smirk. "Oh, yes. You see, Charlotte, I was planning this for months. But yesterday?" She tilted her head slightly. "You gave me a reason to finalize the deal sooner. You reminded me exactly why people like you should never be in positions of power." Charlotte's face burned, her breath coming out in short, sharp bursts. "This is ridiculous. You think you can just waltz in here and take over everything?" Evelyn shrugged, leaning back in the chair that used to belong to Charlotte. "I don't think, Charlotte. I did." Michael, who had been frozen in his chair for the last few minutes, finally found his voice. His hands were shaking slightly as he pointed at the contract. "Where? How did you even get the money for this?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Oh, Michael, you of all people should know that's not a very smart question." She chuckled softly. "You see, while you and Charlotte were busy looking down on people, I was making moves, investments, smart ones. You wouldn't believe how much money you can make when you stop worrying about impressing the people at the top and start becoming the one at the top." Michael swallowed hard, his face paling. Charlotte, however, refused to accept defeat. "I don't care how much money you have," she spat. "You have no experience running a company like this. You'll crash it within months." Evelyn tilted her head. "That's an interesting concern, coming from someone who's been slowly running this company into the ground for years." Charlotte stiffened. Eleanor, who had been silent for most of the exchange, cleared her throat. "She's not wrong, Charlotte," she admitted. "Weston Enterprises has been struggling for a while now. You were just barely holding things together." Charlotte's head snapped toward her. "Oh, don't you start with that nonsense. If the company was struggling, it was because of you," Richard cut in, his voice firm. "Poor leadership, discriminatory hiring practices, employee dissatisfaction. Shall I go on?" Charlotte's mouth opened, but no words came out. Evelyn let out a soft hum. "You see, Charlotte, unlike you, I don't just talk about leadership. I understand it." She glanced around the table. "I know what it means to value people. I know what happens when a company is built on arrogance rather than respect." Her gaze locked onto Charlotte's again. "I know what happens when you underestimate someone just because of where they came from." Charlotte's hands clenched into fists. Evelyn let out a slow breath. "But here's the thing." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "I don't need your approval. I don't need your validation. Because at the end of the day, I own everything now." The words landed like a punch to the gut. Michael looked like he was about to pass out. Eleanor simply nodded, as if she had already accepted this new reality. And Charlotte? Charlotte's entire world had just shattered. Evelyn tapped her fingers against the table once more, before sitting up straight. "Now, I think we should get to the real issue at hand." She turned fully toward Charlotte. "You're fired." A dead silence fell over the room. Charlotte's entire body stiffened. "You!" You can't fire me. Evelyn's expression didn't change. I can, and I just did. Charlotte's breath hitched. This wasn't real. This wasn't real. She had been the one calling the shots. She had been the one in control. How had this happened? Evelyn continued. Effective immediately. You are no longer an employee of this company. Your access has already been revoked, and security is waiting outside this room to escort you out. Charlotte's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she stood, her hands shaking. This is insane. You can't do this. I built this company. Evelyn exhaled sharply through her nose, tilting her head. You built it? She let out a short, humorless laugh. You didn't build anything, Charlotte. You inherited it. You sat back and let other people do the hard work while you reaped the rewards. That's not leadership. That's entitlement. Charlotte was trembling now. You can't just walk in here and take everything from me. Evelyn stood as well, slowly pushing the chair back. You sound just like me when you fired me yesterday, she mused. Charlotte felt her vision blur. This wasn't happening. This wasn't happening. Evelyn turned toward Eleanor. Have the paperwork finalized. I want her removed from everything. Eleanor nodded. Consider it done. Charlotte's lips parted, a desperate breath escaping her. She looked around, waiting for someone, anyone, to step in, to fix this. But no one did. Security had arrived at the doorway, waiting for Evelyn's signal. Evelyn gave Charlotte one last long look. Goodbye, Charlotte. And just like that, everything was gone. Charlotte's heart pounded violently in her chest. Her legs felt weak, like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. She had spent years controlling this company, controlling everyone in it, shaping it in her image. And now, in less than 24 hours, it had all been taken from her by the one person she had never even considered a threat. This isn't happening, she whispered under her breath, her voice shaky. This is some kind of joke. But it wasn't. Evelyn stood in front of her, poised, powerful, and completely unfazed. She knew she had won, and there was no desperation in her eyes, only certainty. That was the part that terrified Charlotte the most. Michael was still seated, his expression blank, his body frozen in disbelief. He looked like a man watching his entire career collapse in slow motion, unable to stop it. Lisa, who had been watching everything from the sidelines, wasn't frozen at all. She had been fighting back a smirk ever since Evelyn walked through the door. The way she carried herself, the way she turned the room upside down without raising her voice, the way she had stripped Charlotte of every ounce of her fake confidence in just a few minutes. It was brilliant. Charlotte turned wildly toward Richard, then Eleanor, then the other board members, her face contorted in rage and desperation. You're just going to let this happen, she snapped, slamming her hands against the table. You're going to let this fraud come in here and ruin everything? Richard gave her a long, measured look before letting out a tired sigh. Charlotte, he said simply, it's already done. His voice was calm, almost indifferent, and that was when Charlotte realized the truth. No one cared that she was losing her power. No one was fighting for her. No one was even looking at her with sympathy. They weren't shocked. They were relieved, and it hit her like a train. All these years she had ruled Weston Enterprises with arrogance, with cruelty, with fear. She had made employees afraid to speak, afraid to challenge her, afraid to even breathe in her presence. And now that she had lost everything, they were all just watching. Some of them even looked satisfied. Evelyn took a slow step forward, the sound of her heels clicking against the marble floor. It's funny, she mused, tilting her head. When you fired me yesterday, you didn't hesitate for a second. You enjoyed it. Charlotte's mouth opened, but no words came out. I wonder, Evelyn continued, her voice softer now, almost dangerous, if it feels the same when it's happening to you. Charlotte's hands curled into fists. Her chest was rising and falling too quickly. The room felt too small, too suffocating. She had to stop this. She had to fix this. This is illegal, Charlotte spat, her voice breaking with panic. I'll sue, You won't, Eleanor interrupted, her voice steady. You signed a contract, Charlotte. The same kind of contract you forced others to sign when you pushed them out of this company. Evelyn smiled at that. "Oh, don't worry. I made sure it was ironclad." Charlotte's face burned. She turned to Michael, the only person left who still looked just as lost as she felt. "Do something," she hissed. Michael's lips parted, but he had nothing to say. His face was pale, sweat forming at his brow. For the first time in his life, he had no answer, no confidence, nothing to back him up. He was just as powerless as she was. The security guards took a small step forward. They didn't have to say anything. Charlotte knew why they were here. Her entire body shook with rage, with humiliation, with a desperation she had never known before. She had never been on this side of power. She had never been the one being forced out, and she hated it. Her throat tightened, her breath shallow. She wanted to fight. She wanted to scream. She wanted to do something, anything to turn this around. But there was nothing left to do. Evelyn slowly turned to the security guards. "Escort her out." Charlotte took a small, stumbling step back. No, you can't do this." Her voice had lost its usual sharpness, her confidence completely shattered. Evelyn's eyes remained steady. "I already did." And with that, the security guard stepped forward. Charlotte fought. She jerked her arms away when they tried to touch her, but she knew it was over. Every person in the room watched as she was forced to walk out of her own company, out of her own office, out of everything she thought she controlled. The doors closed behind her, and then there was silence. For the first time since Evelyn had entered the room, Charlotte was gone. Evelyn exhaled softly before turning her gaze back to Michael. "Well," she said smoothly, "I think it's time we talk about your future here." Michael's body tensed. He knew what was coming next, and suddenly he understood exactly how Charlotte had felt. Michael could feel the sweat collecting at the back of his neck. His breath was uneven, his heartbeat erratic. He knew what was coming. He had seen Charlotte crumble under the weight of her downfall, humiliated in front of everyone. He had watched as security dragged her out, the same way they had discarded employees she deemed unworthy. And now the attention had shifted to him. Evelyn's eyes locked onto his, steady and unreadable. She wasn't rushed. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't gloating. No, she was taking her time, letting the weight of the moment press down on him. Michael swallowed hard. "Evelyn, listen, She held up a hand, and he shut his mouth instantly. "You were very vocal yesterday," she said smoothly. "You had a lot to say about people like me." Michael tensed. He could hear the blood rushing in his ears. "I believe your exact words were, 'She should be grateful I let her work here at all.'" Evelyn's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Funny how things change, isn't it?" Michael shook his head quickly, scrambling for control. "Look, I didn't mean any of that, okay? That was just—" He forced a nervous chuckle. "You know how it is, Evelyn. It was just office talk. Nothing personal." Evelyn tilted her head, considering his words. Then she leaned forward slightly. "You don't get to decide what's personal, Michael." "I do," his stomach twisted. She gestured toward the board members, who all sat quietly, waiting to see how this would unfold. "Tell me something," Evelyn continued, tapping a single finger against the table. "Why is it that you and Charlotte always assumed you were untouchable? Why did you think that the same power you used to step on others would never turn against you?" Michael's throat was dry. "Because you never thought it would happen to you," Evelyn answered her own question. "You've spent years looking down on people, treating them like they were nothing, and you were so convinced that no one from below you could ever rise higher." She exhaled softly. "I want you to remember this feeling, Michael. The fear of losing everything. The way it feels to know that your power, your status, can be ripped away in an instant." Michael's jaw tensed. His hands curled into fists under the table, but he didn't dare speak. Evelyn sat back, studying him for a moment before nodding. "I could fire you right now," she mused. Michael's head snapped up. His entire body went stiff. He knew what it would mean if she did. He would lose everything. His influence, his money, his connections. Weston Enterprises was his identity, and without it, he was just another forgotten executive with a bad reputation. You don't have to do that," he said quickly, the panic creeping into his voice. Evelyn hummed. "Don't I?" Michael's mind raced. He had to fix this. He had to convince her, had to find a way to save himself. I, I get it, he stammered. I messed up. I treated you unfairly. I was wrong. But you don't need to fire me, Evelyn. I can help you. I know this company inside and out. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Oh? And why would I need help from someone like you? Michael forced a weak smile. Because you said it yourself. You don't have years of experience in boardrooms. You have money, power, sure, but you've never led a corporation this size. You'll need someone to guide you, to make sure the transition is smooth. He nodded desperately. That someone could be me. Evelyn didn't respond right away. She just studied him. Michael's palms were sweaty, his confidence unraveling with every passing second. Then she let out a small laugh. It was soft, almost amused, but it was dangerous. You think I need you, she said, shaking her head slightly. That's cute. Michael opened his mouth, but she didn't give him the chance to speak. You're right about one thing, she continued, standing up slowly. I don't have years of experience sitting in a boardroom, bossing people around and signing papers. But do you know what I do have? Michael swallowed hard. I have vision. I have drive. I have the ability to build something from the ground up, without relying on privilege or status. She exhaled softly. And unlike you, I know how to value the people who actually do the work. Michael clenched his jaw. I don't need your guidance, Michael, Evelyn said simply, because I already have a plan for this company. And guess what? You're not in it. Michael froze. His entire body locked up as the reality crashed into him. No, no, no. Evelyn turned to Eleanor. I want his resignation on my desk by the end of the day. Michael lunged forward, gripping the edge of the table. Wait, Evelyn, please, let's... She held up a hand, cutting him off. This isn't a negotiation. Michael's chest rose and fell in rapid breaths. His face twisted with desperation. You can't just throw me away like this. Evelyn tilted her head. That's exactly what you did to countless employees who worked under you. People who depended on this company. People who actually cared about the work they did. Her voice turned cold. Why should I treat you any differently? Michael's hands trembled. Lisa, who had remained quiet all this time, finally let herself smile. She had seen people like Michael rule over this company for years, treating others like they were disposable. But now he was the one being pushed out. Enjoy the rest of your day, Michael, Evelyn said lightly. Michael stumbled backward, his face pale, his breath uneven. He looked around the room for support, for help. But just like Charlotte, he found nothing. No one was on his side. He was finished. Security was already waiting for him. And just like that, Michael Owens, one of the most powerful men in the company, was escorted out the door. Evelyn turned to the rest of the board members. Now that the garbage has been taken out, she said, her voice smooth and sharp, let's talk about the future. And for the first time in years, Weston Enterprises was finally in the hands of someone who deserved it. A thick silence settled over the boardroom. The tension that had filled the air since Evelyn walked in was still there. But now it was different. It wasn't fear. It wasn't resistance. It was curiosity. The board members sat up a little straighter, their eyes fixed on the woman who now controlled everything. Some of them had doubted her, some of them had feared her, and some, like Eleanor and Richard, had already accepted that this change was necessary. But now, as she stood before them, the weight of her authority undeniable, they all had the same thought. What happens next? Evelyn took a deep breath, letting her gaze sweep across the room. This was hers now. The power, the decisions, the responsibility. It all belonged to her. And unlike Charlotte and Michael, she knew exactly what to do with it. She folded her hands in front of her. Let's get one thing clear, she said, her voice calm but firm. I didn't buy this company to keep things the way they were. Some of the board members shifted uncomfortably. They had expected her to come in, shake things up a little, maybe fire a few people, then settle into the usual routine. But from the way she spoke, from the way she carried herself, it was obvious Evelyn had no intention of playing by their rules. This company has been running on outdated systems and outdated leadership for too long, Evelyn continued. I've spent years watching people like Charlotte and Michael abuse their power, mistreat employees, and make decisions that benefited themselves instead of the company. She let that sink in. No one argued. So, here's what's going to happen. She glanced at Eleanor. Effective immediately, I want a full internal review of employee complaints from the last 5 years. Every single one. Eleanor nodded. Understood. Richard leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. Are you planning to restructure the leadership? Evelyn met his gaze. Yes, and that starts today. Another ripple of tension moved through the room. Lisa, who was still standing near the door, felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Evelyn continued. I know there are good people working here. People who have spent years being overlooked because they didn't fit a certain mold. That ends now. She turned her attention to Lisa. You, she said, a small smile playing on her lips. How long have you been working here? Lisa blinked, caught off guard. She straightened. 7 years. Evelyn nodded. And in those 7 years, how many times have you been considered for a promotion? Lisa hesitated, then let out a small, bitter laugh. Never. Evelyn's expression didn't change. That's what I thought. She turned back to the board. People like Lisa have been ignored for too long. That changes today. Lisa's eyes widened as Evelyn looked directly at her again. How would you like to be the new director of operations? The entire room froze. Lisa's lips parted, but no sound came out. Did she just hear that correctly? Charlotte and Michael had spent years making sure she stayed in the same low-level position, watching others, less experienced, less hardworking, get promoted over her. And now? Evelyn was offering her one of the most important leadership roles in the company. Lisa cleared her throat, trying to push down the emotions threatening to spill over. I don't even know what to say. Evelyn smiled. Say yes. Lisa let out a shaky breath, then straightened her shoulders. Yes. The room shifted. For the first time in years, something was changing. Evelyn looked at the rest of the board. I will be making a lot more decisions like this. If you have a problem with that, now is your chance to leave. No one moved. Some of them looked nervous, but none of them walked out. Because deep down, even the ones who had benefited from the old system knew. Evelyn was right. Weston Enterprises had needed a shakeup for a long time. And now, under her leadership, that change was finally happening. Evelyn exhaled and sat back in the chair that once belonged to Charlotte. Good, she said, her voice steady. Now let's get to work. And just like that, Weston Enterprises had a new future. The weight of the moment still hung in the air. Some board members exchanged quiet, uneasy glances, while others sat in stunned silence. No one had expected this. No one had thought Evelyn Carter, a woman they had seen as nothing more than a janitor, would take control, let alone start tearing down everything they thought was permanent. Lisa was still reeling. Her mind was racing. Director of Operations. The words felt unreal. A position she had been overlooked for, dismissed from consideration for, repeatedly ignored despite her years of experience. And just like that, Evelyn had given it to her. Lisa swallowed hard and tried to steady herself. I won't let you down, she said, her voice firm but emotional. Evelyn gave her a small nod, the kind of nod that meant she already knew that. Then she turned back to the rest of the board. Let's get something straight, she said, her tone sharp enough to cut through the tension. I didn't just buy this company to sit behind a desk and sign papers. I bought it because it needed to be fixed. And if any of you have a problem with that, I suggest you resign now. A few of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Some of them had been just as guilty as Charlotte and Michael. Maybe they hadn't been as openly cruel, but they had allowed it. They had watched from the sidelines, choosing to do nothing. But now the rules had changed. Evelyn exhaled and leaned forward. Here's how this is going to work. Starting today, every policy that was built to keep certain people from advancing in this company is gone. Every person who was passed over, ignored, or mistreated, we're going to take a long, hard look at why that happened. And if any of you were part of that problem, she let the words hang in the air for a second before delivering the final blow. You won't be part of the future. A ripple of unease moved through the room. Richard cleared his throat. And what about the investors? They'll want reassurance that the company's stability won't be shaken by these changes. Evelyn turned to him. Investors only care about two things: profit and reputation. Right now, the reputation of this company is built on discrimination, high employee turnover, and fear-based leadership. That's not stability. That's a ticking time bomb. Richard couldn't argue with that. Evelyn continued. Once the public finds out what's been happening inside these walls, Weston Enterprises will be known for the wrong reasons. If we don't clean up this mess now, the investors will start pulling out anyway. And when that happens, you know exactly what follows: layoffs, stock crashes, a complete corporate collapse, and everyone in this room knew it. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, tapping a manicured nail against the table. So, what's your plan? Evelyn exhaled, already expecting that question. The first step is fixing the company culture. The second step is making sure this company is actually worth investing in. She turned to Lisa. We're going to do a full employee audit. I want every department analyzed, every complaint investigated, and every toxic manager exposed. Lisa nodded immediately. I'll get started on it today. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. That's going to expose a lot of skeletons, Evelyn. Evelyn met her gaze. Good, that's the point. Another heavy silence. Some board members were clearly uncomfortable. Others were intrigued. A few of them, like Richard and Eleanor, were watching Evelyn closely, as if trying to figure out what kind of leader she was going to be. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. And as for the financial side of things, that's already handled. Richard raised an eyebrow. Handled how? Evelyn smiled. Let's just say Weston Enterprises isn't the only company I own. A few gasps rippled through the boardroom. Richard stared at her. You have other businesses? Evelyn gave him a knowing look. Did you really think I just stumbled into the money to buy this place? She chuckled softly. I've been making my own deals, my own investments. Real estate, tech startups, logistics. I didn't just build one source of wealth, I built multiple. And now Weston Enterprises is just another part of the empire. The realization settled over the room like a heavy fog. She wasn't just some janitor who got lucky. She had been building something much bigger than any of them had ever imagined. Eleanor was the first to nod in approval. Well, damn, she muttered under her breath, impressed despite herself. Richard exhaled slowly, rubbing his chin. All right, you have my attention. A few other board members nodded as well, starting to realize that Evelyn wasn't here to destroy the company. She was here to make it stronger. But there were still a few skeptics. One of the older board members, Gregory Hughes, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke. His voice was slow, measured. You're making a lot of promises, he said, but changing a company like this isn't as simple as throwing out bad policies and hiring new people. This is a multi-million-dollar corporation. Every decision you make will have consequences. Evelyn turned her gaze to him. And the consequences of doing nothing are far worse. Gregory studied her, his expression unreadable. You really think you can pull this off? Evelyn didn't blink. I don't think. I know. The room went still again. Gregory exhaled, nodding slightly. Then let's see what you've got. Evelyn smirked. Oh, don't worry, she said smoothly. You will. For the first time since stepping into that room, Evelyn felt completely in control. Not because she owned the company, not because she had the money or the power, but because she had a vision. Weston Enterprises wasn't just hers to own. It was hers to rebuild. And this was just the beginning. The energy in the boardroom had shifted. Evelyn could feel it. She had walked in as the new owner of Weston Enterprises. But now they were seeing her as something more. A force, a leader. Someone they couldn't ignore. Still, there were those who didn't want change. The ones who benefited from the old system. Evelyn knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. She leaned forward slightly, folding her hands on the table. Now that we're all on the same page, she said, her tone steady, let's talk about the next phase. Richard gave her a nod, clearly intrigued. Eleanor was still watching her closely, waiting to see just how far she planned to take this. Gregory Hughes, the oldest and most conservative member of the board, remained quiet. his fingers tapping against the table in thought. Lisa was the only one who looked genuinely excited. Evelyn turned to her. What's the first thing employees complain about in this company? Lisa didn't hesitate. Lack of opportunity. Promotions only go to a certain type of person. If you're not in the right social circles, if you don't look the part, you stay stuck where you are. Evelyn nodded. I figured. She glanced at the rest of the board. Starting today, promotions will be based on merit. Not friendships, not status, not favoritism. If someone works hard, they'll get what they deserve. A few board members stiffened. This was where the real fight would start. Gregory sighed. That's easier said than done, Ms. Carter. Evelyn arched a brow. What part of that do you disagree with? Gregory rubbed his temple. You have to understand, some of these employees have been with the company for decades. If we suddenly start shifting leadership positions around, there will be backlash. Evelyn gave a small amused smile. You think I'm afraid of backlash? Gregory exhaled, shaking his head. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if you disrupt too much at once, it could shake the company's stability. Evelyn's smile faded. This company isn't stable, Gregory. She gestured toward the door where Charlotte and Michael had been dragged out not long ago. If Weston Enterprises was truly stable, two of its highest-ranking executives wouldn't have been removed in one day. The only thing that's been keeping this place from collapsing was fear. The room went dead silent. Gregory stared at her. He wasn't used to being challenged this way. Charlotte had always let the board control the direction of the company, but Evelyn wasn't Charlotte. Eleanor, who had been watching the exchange with interest, spoke up. She's right. Gregory turned toward her. You agree with this? Eleanor nodded. I do. The culture here is toxic. We all know it. Charlotte ruled through intimidation, and Michael followed right behind her. The employees who actually deserved to move up were ignored, and we let it happen because it didn't affect us. Richard nodded in agreement. Eleanor's right. Change isn't just necessary, it's overdue. Gregory sighed heavily. He wasn't happy about it, but he wasn't stupid either. He knew that if he kept resisting, he'd be next on the chopping block. Evelyn gave him a knowing look. Are you going to be a part of the solution, Gregory? Or are you going to be part of the problem? Gregory exhaled slowly, then nodded. I'll cooperate. Evelyn wasn't convinced. She knew he was saying what needed to be said, but she also knew men like Gregory. He wasn't going to go down quietly. That was fine. She'd deal with him when the time came. For now, she had bigger things to handle. She leaned back in her chair. Next, we need to talk about employee compensation. From what I've seen, this company pays top executives 10 times more than the people actually doing the work. Eleanor nodded. That's true. Evelyn tapped her fingers against the table. That ends now. Salaries are being reviewed immediately. I want fair pay across the board. No more absurd executive bonuses while lower-level employees struggle to make ends meet. Richard chuckled. Now this is where you'll see real pushback. Evelyn smirked. Let them push. Lisa bit her lip, trying to contain her excitement. Everything she had hoped for, everything employees had been praying for, Evelyn was actually doing it. Evelyn turned her gaze back to the board. And then, there's the issue of our reputation. Eleanor leaned forward. Go on. Evelyn exhaled. Like I said before, once the public finds out how this company has been run, the backlash is going to be massive. We need to get ahead of it. Richard nodded. How do you propose we do that? Evelyn smiled. She had been waiting for this. We announce the change before anyone else does, she said. We don't let the media control the narrative. We control it ourselves. We publicly acknowledge the issues within this company, and we make it clear that this is a new era. Gregory frowned. You want to publicly admit to the company's failures? Evelyn nodded. Yes. A murmur ran through the room. Eleanor smirked. That's bold. Evelyn crossed her arms. Bold is exactly what this company needs right now. Richard rubbed his chin. If we handle the messaging right, this could actually work in our favor. Evelyn nodded. It will. People respect accountability. If we own up to past mistakes and prove that we're taking real steps toward change, we'll earn back trust. And once people trust a company, they invest in it. Lisa smiled. It was brilliant. Not just the strategy, but the fact that Evelyn wasn't running from the truth. She wasn't hiding behind PR teams or excuses. She was facing it head on. Gregory still looked hesitant, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. Because Evelyn was right, Evelyn exhaled, glancing at the time. She had been in this room longer than expected, but it was worth it. She pushed her chair back and stood. I think that's enough for today. The board members slowly rose as well. Some looked uneasy, some looked resigned, but none of them looked defiant. They all understood what had just happened. This company belonged to Evelyn Carter now. She had walked into this room as the new owner. She walked out as its true leader. Lisa followed her toward the door. Evelyn, she said, keeping her voice low. Evelyn glanced at her. Yeah? Lisa hesitated, then smiled. It's about damn time. Evelyn chuckled. Oh, Lisa, she said, pushing the doors open. This is just the beginning. Evelyn stepped out of the boardroom with Lisa by her side, her mind already working ahead. The hardest part was over, taking control. Now came the real work, restructuring everything from the inside out. As they walked through the hallways of Weston Enterprises, employees stole glances at them. Some looked confused. Some whispered in hushed voices. Others avoided eye contact altogether. They had heard about what happened in the boardroom. They had felt the shift in power, but no one knew exactly what was coming next. Lisa sighed, shaking her head. You do realize you just turned this entire company upside down in less than a day, right? Evelyn smirked. Good, it needed to happen. Lisa chuckled. Still, people are panicking. Employees are nervous. They don't know what to expect. Evelyn stopped in the middle of the hallway, turning to face Lisa fully. What do they expect? Lisa hesitated. They expect you to be like Charlotte, to make promises and then forget about them once you get comfortable in your position. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Then it's time to prove them wrong. She turned on her heels and walked straight toward the HR department. The first real change, the Human Resources Department had always been a joke under Charlotte's leadership. Complaints were ignored, promotions were determined by personal connections, and workplace harassment was swept under the rug. Not anymore. When Evelyn and Lisa walked in, the head of HR, Martin Reynolds, was sitting behind his desk, scrolling through emails. He looked up at them, blinking in surprise. Ms. Carter, what can I do for you? Evelyn didn't waste time. I want every single discrimination complaint from the last 5 years on my desk by the end of the day. Martin's expression dropped. 5 years? Yes. Martin cleared his throat, sitting up straighter. That's a lot of files to go through. Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. Then you better start now. Lisa crossed her arms, barely holding back a smirk. Martin had been part of the problem for years, brushing complaints under the rug to keep people like Charlotte happy. And now he looked terrified. Evelyn tilted her head. Is there a problem? Martin hesitated. Some of those complaints were resolved. Lisa scoffed. No, they were ignored. Evelyn let the silence hang in the air for a moment before speaking again. Let me make something clear, Martin. I don't care how high up someone was when these complaints were filed. I don't care if they were an executive, a manager, or a board member. If there's evidence of discrimination, harassment, or unethical behavior, they will be held accountable. Martin's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Of course, Ms. Carter. I'll have the files sent to you by the end of the day. Evelyn nodded. Good. And Martin? Yes? If I find out that any complaint has been tampered with, erased, or altered in any way, she leaned in slightly, you'll be out of a job before you can pack your desk. Martin nodded so fast he nearly tipped forward. Understood. Evelyn turned to Lisa. We're going to need a separate internal team to review everything. Find employees who have been vocal about these issues before. The ones who care about making a real difference. Lisa nodded immediately. I already have a few people in mind. Evelyn glanced around the HR department. The employees were silent, their eyes wide, listening to everything. She didn't mind. Let them listen. Let them talk. Let them know that the days of silence were over. The reaction of the employees. By the time Evelyn and Lisa left HR, the entire building was buzzing. Employees were whispering in break rooms, texting each other, watching from a distance. Some were nervous, some were excited, and some were waiting to see if Evelyn was really different or if she was just another Charlotte. Lisa noticed the looks they were getting and exhaled. "They're watching you," Evelyn smirked. "Let them." The moment she really made her way into the general office space, people started shifting uncomfortably. Not because they feared her, but because they weren't used to this. The CEO never walked through here. Charlotte had spent her time in an office with frosted glass doors and an assistant who made sure no low-level employees ever wasted her time. Evelyn? She walked directly through the office, stopping at desks, greeting people by name, asking about their work. She wasn't just making an appearance. She was showing them that she was different, and people were noticing. A young woman from the accounting department, Naomi Wells, stood up hesitantly when Evelyn stopped near her desk. Miss Carter?" Evelyn turned to her. "Yes?" Naomi looked nervous but determined. I heard about what happened in the boardroom." Evelyn waited. Naomi took a breath. "Are you really going to fix this place?" Lisa stiffened slightly beside Evelyn. That was the question on everyone's mind. Evelyn met Naomi's gaze. "Yes." Naomi didn't look convinced. "With all due respect, ma'am, we've heard that before." A few employees nearby nodded in agreement. Lisa knew this was a test. The employees were waiting to see how Evelyn would respond. Evelyn exhaled softly. "I get it," she said. "You've heard a lot of promises, and you've seen a lot of people in power who don't care about the people doing the real work." Naomi bit her lip but nodded. Evelyn folded her arms. "Let me ask you something. Do you think Charlotte would have fired herself?" Naomi blinked. No. "Do you think Michael would have been removed if I hadn't taken over?" Naomi hesitated. No." Evelyn gave a small smirk. "Then I'd say we're already off to a good start, wouldn't you?" A slow smile spread across Naomi's face. She nodded. Other employees watched the exchange, absorbing every word. And then something shifted. It was small at first, a murmur, a glance exchanged between coworkers, a few nods of agreement. Then it started spreading. Hope. Not the forced kind that comes with empty corporate promises. Real hope. Because for the first time in years, they believed something was actually going to change. And Evelyn Carter? She was just getting started. The atmosphere in Weston Enterprises had changed. Employees could feel it. They weren't just hearing about change. They were seeing it. It had started with Charlotte's humiliating exit, followed by Michael's desperate downfall. But what really made them pay attention? Evelyn's actions. She wasn't hiding in an office. She wasn't making empty promises. She had walked through the building, looked people in the eye, and told them the truth. Things were about to change, and for the first time, they actually believed it. The first employee meeting in years. By mid-afternoon, an email had gone out to every single employee in the company. Mandatory company-wide meeting, 4 p.m. No one knew what to expect. Under Charlotte, company meetings had been rare. And when they did happen, they were just an excuse for executives to pat themselves on the back while employees sat quietly, knowing nothing would actually change. But this was different. When 4 p.m. arrived, every single employee in the company was present. Some stood near the back of the room, arms crossed, waiting to see if this was worth their time. Others leaned in, eager, hopeful, whispering to one another. And then Evelyn walked in. There was no microphone, no stage, no podium separating her from the employees. She walked straight to the center of the room, among the people who had been overlooked for years. Lisa stood beside her, giving a small nod of encouragement. Evelyn took a deep breath. "All right," she started, her voice carrying across the space. "Let's talk." A murmur ran through the crowd. One of the warehouse employees, Troy Daniels, raised his hand. "Are you really the new owner?" Evelyn smiled slightly. "Yes." Another voice, this time from a woman in the marketing department, Jenna Ruiz. "Are the rumors true? Did you really buy the company after getting fired?" Evelyn's smirk widened. "That's exactly what happened." Whispers erupted around the room. Someone from the back called out, "So what happens now?" Evelyn's face grew serious. "Now we rebuild. From the ground up." The murmurs stopped. Every single person in the room was listening now. Fixing what was broken. Evelyn glanced around the room. These were the people who actually made the company run, the ones who stayed late to fix last-minute disasters, the ones who got blamed when things went wrong, but never got credit when things went right. She had been one of them. "I'm not going to stand up here and pretend to be some corporate savior," Evelyn continued. "I know that a lot of you don't trust leadership, and I don't blame you." A few people nodded, silent agreement. "You've worked under people who didn't see you, who didn't listen, who treated you like you were replaceable." Evelyn's jaw tightened slightly. "I know because I worked under them too." The tension in the room shifted. This wasn't an executive talking at them. This was one of their own standing in front of them, telling them the truth. Evelyn folded her arms. "So let's get one thing straight. I don't want your loyalty. I want your honesty." Confused glances spread through the crowd. "I want to know what's broken," Evelyn clarified. "I want to know what's wrong. I want to hear about every unfair promotion, every ignored complaint, every rule that was used against you but bent for someone else. I want the truth." No one spoke, not because they didn't have anything to say, but because they had never been asked before. A single hand slowly rose in the crowd. It was Naomi Wells from accounting, the same woman who had confronted Evelyn earlier. She hesitated, but when Evelyn gave her a small nod, she took a deep breath and said, "The pay gaps. They're real." Evelyn's expression didn't change. "Go on." Naomi swallowed. "Men in my department with the same title as me make on average $12,000 more per year. Some of them have even been here for less time than I have." A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Lisa knew this was true. She had seen the salary sheets herself. Evelyn nodded. "Thank you for speaking up." She turned toward the rest of the room. "Who else?" Silence. Then a voice from the IT department, Miles Carter. "HR doesn't investigate anything. If you file a complaint, it either disappears or gets used against you." Another voice, Sarah Lim from logistics. "Managers play favorites. People get promotions based on who they're friends with, not based on their work." And then, like a dam breaking, the flood of truth came rushing in. "They keep delaying benefits for part-time employees, so they never qualify for full-time perks. I was written up for being late because of a childcare emergency, but my male coworker wasn't punished for coming in late every day. They say we have equal opportunity hiring, but look around this room. How many executives look like us?" Evelyn let them talk. For the first time in years, they weren't afraid of consequences. They were being heard. Lisa stole a glance at Evelyn. This was what real leadership looked like. The new way forward. When the voices finally quieted, Evelyn spoke again. "This is why I'm here," she said. "This is why I bought the company. Because this," she gestured to the room, "this isn't how things should be." She exhaled, running a hand through her hair. "Here's what's going to happen next. First, we're doing a full company-wide audit. Every salary, every department, every hiring practice. It's all being reviewed." A few stunned murmurs. "Second, I'm establishing a direct employee feedback system. No more complaints disappearing into HR's trash bin. You'll have a direct line to me, Lisa, and an independent review team. If something isn't right, we will fix it." Lisa straightened, proud to be part of this. Evelyn let out a slow breath. "And third, we're going to change the way promotions work. No more favoritism. If you've earned it, you'll get it." Period. A moment of stunned silence. Then from the back of the room, applause. It started slow, uncertain. Then it grew. The sound rolled through the room, growing louder with each passing second. People weren't just clapping, they were believing. Lisa grinned. "That went well." Evelyn smirked, crossing her arms. "Told you, this is just the beginning." The applause died down, but the energy in the room remained electric. Something had shifted, something real. For the first time in years, the employees of Weston Enterprises weren't just listening to another empty speech from a CEO who didn't care. They had just witnessed a revolution. Evelyn stood tall in the center of it all, watching the faces around her. These weren't just employees anymore. They were people who had been ignored, mistreated, and overlooked. And now they had a voice. Lisa leaned toward Evelyn. "I hope you realize you just changed everything." Evelyn let out a small breath, finally allowing herself to take in what had just happened. She had come into this company as an outsider, a woman who had once pushed a mop down these very hallways. She had been laughed at, disrespected, thrown out like trash. But now she owned everything. She turned to Lisa, a small, knowing smile on her lips. "Yeah," she murmured. "I think I did." Charlotte's fall. The final chapter. Meanwhile, across town, Charlotte Holloway sat at a sleek, modern bar with a half-empty glass of wine in front of her. The once powerful CEO of Weston Enterprises had spent the entire day watching her legacy crumble on live news broadcasts. Every major business outlet had picked up the story. Former Weston Enterprises CEO ousted after years of allegations. Evelyn Carter, from janitor to CEO, the business move no one saw coming. Corporate power shift, employees rally behind new leadership. Every headline felt like a knife to the chest. She had built this company. She had controlled everything. And now, she had nothing. Michael had tried to call her earlier, but she ignored him. What could he possibly say? He had been dragged down with her, humiliated just as she had been. She took another sip of wine, trying to push down the bitterness rising in her throat. But no amount of alcohol could erase the reality. She had been beaten. And the worst part, she never saw it coming. A slow, mocking voice interrupted her thoughts. "Didn't expect to see you here." Charlotte stiffened. She didn't need to turn around to recognize the voice. She already knew who it was. Evelyn. Charlotte clenched her jaw before looking up. And there she was, standing tall, poised, powerful. Evelyn Carter, the woman she had humiliated, fired, and thrown aside, now owned the company she had once ruled. Evelyn pulled out the bar stool beside her and sat down, resting her elbows on the counter. "You look different," she said casually. Charlotte let out a sharp laugh, one filled with resentment. "I'm sure you're enjoying this." Evelyn shrugged. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't." Charlotte exhaled through her nose, gripping her glass. "Why are you here?" Evelyn tilted her head. "I wanted to see how you were holding up." Charlotte scoffed. "Save the sympathy. I don't need it." Evelyn chuckled. "I wasn't offering any." Charlotte turned to face her fully. "You think this is over? You think you won?" Evelyn smirked. "I don't think, Charlotte. I know." Charlotte's grip tightened on her glass. "You might be on top now, but things change. You won't last." Evelyn leaned in slightly. "See, that's the difference between you and me. I'm not here to last. I'm here to build, to make this company something worth leading." She raised an eyebrow. "You, on the other hand, you were just trying to hold on to power." Charlotte said nothing. Evelyn took a slow sip of her drink, letting the silence stretch between them. Then she stood up, leaving a crisp $1 bill on the bar counter, a tip Charlotte would have never given to someone she deemed beneath her. "Enjoy your retirement," Evelyn said over her shoulder before walking away. Charlotte sat there, her pride in shambles, her legacy reduced to nothing. And for the first time in her life, she knew what it felt like to be powerless. Weston Enterprises. A new beginning. Back at the office, employees had returned to their desks. But something was different. The whispers in the hallways were no longer about fear. They were about hope. Lisa stood beside Evelyn, watching the energy shift around them. "You ready for this?" Evelyn exhaled, looking around. Her company, her people, her future. She turned to Lisa, a confident smirk on her lips. "I was born ready." And with that, Weston Enterprises stepped into a new era, one built on respect, fairness, and power in the right hands. The hands of a woman who had once been ignored, a woman who had once been overlooked, a woman who was now unstoppable. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Evelyn made the right decisions? What would you have done in her place? And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this. See you in the next one.